A special thank you to Sante Magazine and 750 for sponsoring our second annual The Next Big Step event. I am Jen O'Flanagan, the co-president of Les Dames d'Escoffier New York. We are the first and largest chapter of Les Dames d'Escoffier International, which has 45 branches worldwide. Our mission is to advance, advocate for, and support aspiring professional women in food and beverage. And one of the most important things that we do is to grant scholarships to promising young women. You can find out more about us by visiting www.ldny.org. Education is a key pillar of our organization, and Dom Susanna Gold has once again put together a fantastic panel of experts in wine and spirits who will expose critical issues and opportunities that have emerged as a result of the pandemic, and we'll discuss key takeaways for 2021. I'm now pleased to introduce our moderator, Dom Kristen Bieler, editor-in-chief of 750 Daily and Beverage Media. Kristen has been writing about and reporting on food and drinks for over 2 decades and has traveled to wine and spirits regions around the globe for her research. Kristen served as editor and contributor to Food and Wine Magazine's annual wine guide for 7 years, and her writing has appeared in GQ and Taste, among many others. Kristen, take it away.
Thanks so much, Jen. I was so honored when I was asked to moderate this panel. And then when Odila and Susanna showed me the list of women who were going to be on this panel, I was just blown away. It's such an incredible group. So you'll hear from them today. They represent, a really wide range of sectors in the wine and spirits industry, but what they all have in common is they're all entrepreneurs. They're all kind of leading, they're all creating things and taking risks and making bold decisions. And that's the kind of grit and innovation that our industry really needs right now, particularly as we start the work of rebuilding after the pandemic. So I'm going to go through and introduce each one briefly. These are very abbreviated bios because these women have too many accomplishments to list here. And then we will start our discussion. So we have Ana Christina Cabrales. Yeah, thank you. Ana Christina left the corporate world behind to pursue food and wine, and she joined Morel Wine Bar in 2012. She expanded their wine list significantly, especially the By the Glass list, and Morel was named Best By the Glass Wine List by the World of Fine Wine. Morel also attained the Award of Excellence from Wine Spectator under her direction. In 2020, in the wake of the pandemic, Ana Christina pivoted from in-store activities to found Sommation Live, providing education via Instagram live videos and posts for the struggling restaurant and trade community. And she has amassed 29,000 listeners, super impressive. But more than that, she's become a really vocal advocate for change and forcing some difficult discussions on hard topics. And we'll talk to her more about that later. We have Gabriela. Gabriela Davogustto. She's the wine director at Clay Restaurant in Harlem, one of my favorite restaurants. I happen to live down the street, so I'm a regular there. It's such a special spot. Raised in Venezuela, Gabby entered the hospitality industry after moving to the US in 2001. She cooked for some many well-known New York kitchens, including Boqueria and Valse. She's currently in the final stages of completing her WSET diploma. And Gabi opened Clay along with bar director Andrea Needle Matiliano and executive chef Gustavo Lopez in 2017. Davogustto runs the front of house and directs the wine program. And Clay's wine list focuses mainly on sustainably produced, clean tasting and affordable wines from all over the world. Next, we have Christy Frank, the owner of Copake Wineworks. Christy Frank is a leader in the independent wine retail scene. Her original shop, Frankly Wines in Manhattan, was touted as one of the top small wine shops in the country, and she sold it in 2017. She opened Copake Wineworks in the Hudson Valley, and she's also the educational development manager for Wine Australia. And she writes for a number of industry publications, including for me. She's one of my best writers at 750 Daily and Beverage Media, regular contributor. She's actually worked in all 3 tiers of the business because she had a 7-year stint at Moet Hennessy, which is the wine and spirits division of LVMH. Christy's also served on the New York Times wine tasting panel. Next, we have Samara Davis. She's the founder of the Black Bourbon Society and Diversity Distilled. Samara founded the Black Bourbon Society in 2016 upon realizing there was a lack of diversity within the bourbon community. Today, the Black Bourbon Society has over 20,000 followers and members. Samara was named one of Wine Enthusiast's top 40 under 40, and she's been featured in the New York Times, Forbes, Black Enterprise, and more. She's an executive bourbon steward, and she hosts tasting seminars, she educates, and she judges competitions. Last year, Samara founded Diversity Distilled, which is a nonprofit consulting firm that works with brands in the spirits industry to address their diversity and inclusion needs within their own workforces. And last but not least, we have Dia Sims, the CEO of Lobos 1707 Tequila and Mezcal. Dia began her career working for the Department of Defense, and then she moved into marketing and co-founded her own marketing company. She spent 15 years working alongside Sean Diddy Combs at Combs Enterprises. She built multiple brands and businesses under the Combs Enterprises umbrella. Dia was named president of Combs Enterprises in 2017, where she oversaw the multi-billion-dollar brands, including Ciroc Vodka, which she took from an unprofitable brand to a $2 billion retail value brand. Then just last year, Dia launched Lobos 1707 in November of 2020. Listed as one of the most powerful executives in the industry by Billboard, Dia is on the Ebony Power 100 list, and she listed in the 2018 Ad Age Women to Watch list, as well as Variety's Power Women of New York Impact list. So we can see we have quite a lineup. So I thought, since we just finished reading Dia's bio, let's just start there with her. Dia, your career trajectory is such a phenomenal story. Working your way up to become the president of this massive enterprise and building not just Ciroc into this incredible success story, but other businesses like the clothing brand, which was part of Combs Enterprises and others. So you have perspective across many consumer goods and luxury segments. And now you're launching your own super premium tequila and mezcal. So you attribute part of the success of Ciroc to what you call the social diffusion model, which is how you start a trend or build a brand that really resonates. Can you explain how this works?
Absolutely. First, just thank you. It was like such a lovely introduction. I'm gonna tell my husband, like, can you introduce me like that when we go places? No, but I'm delighted to be here. It's an incredible group, and I very much feel privileged to be among this group. In terms of what we call kind of the social diffusion model, at Combs Enterprises, this was really like, the internal gospel. And it spoke to just leveraging in a way that was respectful and authentic, all the creativity and innovation that comes out of culture, and really putting a scientific paradigm around how do you make sure that at the heartbeat of culture that those groups that identify the trends before we even know about them 3 years later, how are you having a requited relationship with them at the beginning and making sure you have a brand that fits in, is not forced in, but that fits in and then can reverberate out through tentacles, through culture. And that's whether that's through, we decide we want to come out with a new blue pen today, and making sure that the right artists know about our pen, and it's in all the top music studios. We've identified all the talk jocks to talk about how great this pen is, and make sure that it's on the back of every Seen and Heard in the right people's hands, and that when you walk into every Staples and Giant, somebody's sampling that beautiful pen and in the way it writes, and then coordinating with the paper community to make sure that it actually is a beautiful experience when you immerse yourself in it, right? So, really the idea is how you make sure that your brand fits in throughout the entirety of the life spectrum of how trends get created, but not just as a trend, in a sustainable product proposition. And you can't fake your way into that. You have to hire people that actually represent the consumer you serve. And particularly in our industry, it's important that we are respectful in engagement on both sides of the bar, I think, to ensure that total beverage alcohol moves forward.
I think that's such a good point, just the authenticity and not being able to fake it, which is why so many companies don't do this well, and why Ciroc is such a unique success story. And that, I also wanted to ask you about, we're having a lot of these conversations, these overdue conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion right now. Combs Enterprises was always a remarkably diverse organization from a long time ago. And then you've created a really diverse team at Lobos 1707. And I think that's part of the story here, like how the brand was, organically able to build a diverse consumer base, because that's the company, that was who was in leadership and who you were hiring. And about how, that requires this everyday level of investment, like you spoke about. It's not just about, investing during Black History Month. It's about kind of showing up every day. Can you talk about that a little
exactly. Bit? At Lobos 1707, which is the tequila and mezcal we launched, soft launch around November last year, we were really very intentional about the team that we wanted to build. As you can imagine, and I'm sure some of you experienced the same, it was a little bit like, you sure you still want to launch this in the pandemic? And you had to really be thoughtful and think through like, okay, what are our consumers going through? What kind of human beings do we want to hire? Like, I don't want to, I'm going to be like many of us, like working all the time. So if I'm going to work all the time, I want to work next to people that, you know, you respect and say please and thank you and have civility. But beyond that, we want to create a tapestry that represents the consumer we serve. And we want to have the opportunity to be intentional about each hire and make sure that like we are over 60% women, over 50% diverse on purpose. I think there's no, it kind of takes the excuses away. And that's the blessing of entrepreneurship, where you can be highly intentional about the fabric upon which you weave your organization, which is why it's so critical. And I think why we're all here today. You look at the, you know, these beautiful women, this is what the future of spirits is.
You've been very outspoken about just this dearth of women leadership across many industries, which is certainly true of this industry too. But you're viewing it, interestingly, I think through the lens of an entrepreneur and a businesswoman. So it's not just about, this is what you should do because it's the right thing. It's like, no, this is actually good for the bottom line. Can you explain?
Yeah, it's actually necessary. Like, that's the thing is to me, it's almost like a 911 fiduciary failing if you're not intentional. And I'll talk right now specifically, although there's stats across almost every underserved population, but I'll talk about women as an example. There's a great 2015 study that Fortune reported on. It was done by, they're no longer up and running, but by like an algorithm trading group called Quantopian. And they did a 12-year study showing women that were in the S&P 1000 CEOs, about 80 women CEOs, versus the average S&P CEO at the S&P 500 male CEOs. And on average, the women CEOs were doing a 266% ROI higher than their male counterparts. So like, this is, please, I'll email the study to everybody.
Amazing.
Like, this is not, my view is that it would be great if power was shared through the generosity of spirit. That's unlikely, right? But let's just look at the facts and the fact that we're all in business and we're all hopefully compassionate capitalists. But if you care about your bottom line and you're not intentional about having at least 50% of women in leadership, like we are in a population, it's actually a disservice to your constituents.
Fascinating. So really quick before I move on to our next panelist, you had an interesting experience in between, right before you launched Lobos 1707.
Yes.
You were in cannabis.
Yes. Yes.
And there's so much talk right now about how cannabis could be cutting into beverage alcohol, stealing share. How are these categories? How is the interplay going to work? How do you see that playing out, particularly now as we're seeing more and more states legalize recreational use?
You know, it's interesting when you look at like, so if you look at, take 3 states, take Oregon, Washington, and Colorado. In their first 3 years after legalization, spirits, just foolproof spirits, actually went up during the same time. Wine was actually inconsistent, up in some, down in others, and beer declined. So that's like the smallest, like, clear data set that we can pull from. We know that spirits consumption overall as a category is declining, but premiumization is going up. So people are drinking less, right, but drinking better. It's something that we have to watch. I think you also have to just have eyes wide open about the fact that there's cannabis utilization is high today, whether it's legal or not, right? So you have the difference between, like, behaviors are already coexisting in the spirit space, hopefully as responsibly as possible. Is that really going to change dramatically? I think honestly, time will tell.
Interesting. Thank you. So moving on to Christy. Christy, there's a few people who know more about the way wine is sort of made, distributed, sold from every channel than Christy. She's my go-to writer for really sexy topics like, wine delivery 101 and how do you set up an in-house wine delivery program. She just wrote about that for me. But I wanted to ask her to talk today about how the pandemic has really impacted a lot of laws about what retailers are allowed to do. So especially with direct shipping, wine and spirits retailers have long operated in a very strict regulatory environment. Many of these laws have been on the books since Prohibition, but because there wasn't a strong consumer appetite for purchasing wine online, we didn't bump up against them as much. And then the pandemic hits, everyone's buying wine online. And there's this massive shift towards needing to have this channel working. And now we're bumping up against these restrictions. And in some states, these laws are changing. So Christy, what do you think the long-term impact this pandemic could have on how we are purchasing wine?
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited to be here as a retailer. I love literally talking shop and all these very sexy things like the laws, which I'm about to talk about. So on to the question. We'll talk a little bit about some of the laws that we've seen changing. I mean, in general, it's been good news in the sense of there's been relaxing of restrictions around the delivery of wine and in spirits, both for shops and for restaurants. Now, when we actually talk about the interstate shipping piece of it, that's still pretty restricted. We really haven't seen much in terms of formal relaxations, but at the state level, there's definitely been a general easing of these rules, especially within some of the more restrictive states. It's really important to remember for anyone who's not deeply engaged in all of the legal minutia of this, that when it comes to beverage alcohol, every state is essentially its own little country in terms of the rules of the game. So it's really hard to keep up with everybody. As an operator in New York, I can barely keep up with New York, but I'll give you a little sense of what's going on. For example, in Georgia, retailers were not allowed to deliver at all, period. You had to come to the shop and get it until roughly until the end of the summer, when municipalities decided that the state passed a law and the municipalities could vote to allow delivery within their municipality. So it's still kind of confusing, but it kind of threw this lifeline out to retailers who wanted to do it to be able to offer that delivery channel. In terms of restaurants and bars, we've really seen things start to loosen up. In most states, I think it's like 34 states, restaurants and bars are now allowed to sell wine and cocktails to go, or some combination. In most cases, that was done through some sort of emergency order by the state governor, but there are a handful of state legislatures that have actually made it official for a certain period of time. And in some cases, I think Ohio and Iowa, they've made it permanent. So we are starting to see things move in that direction. And I'd like to say that it's being motivated by this great desire to provide convenience and access and all sorts of choice for customers, but that's not probably what's going on. It really is meant to provide a lifeline for businesses in a really extraordinary time, especially for the restaurants. We know that beverage alcohol is a major profit center for restaurants and bars. It also offers some small measure of safety for shops to be able to sell outside of the shop as opposed to face-to-face where it's not quite comfortable yet. And it helps to generate sales tax revenue. So that's the cynic in me talking. Whatever the reason, we're definitely seeing consumers respond to these options. And it's interesting because there's always just been something about this industry where we've said people just don't want to shop online. There's just something about the category that people just don't want to shop online, aside from the laws. And what the pandemic has proven is that that's not the case. In the early days, Nielsen has this great chart of the early days of the pandemic, where basically it was 10 years worth of growth in 3 months, totally off the charts, kind of crazy. It tapered off a little bit as the pandemic went on, and the restaurants started to reopen a little bit. We saw some of the business shifting into the on-trade, but the appetite was there, and the appetite was there at all prices, not just inexpensive bottles of I need my Pinot Grigio right now, but $15 plus. Every single category was growing at least 20%. So, the optimist in me really says, I see this, and I hope that the states are seeing it and understanding that selling wine online can be done safely and profitably. For the shops and for their sales tax coffers, the customers have proven that they want it, and the retailers have shown that they can do it capably, and hopefully the state legislatures will just sort of catch up and we'll continue to see it move in this direction.
And these laws aren't going back. I mean, do you see the people who have, in regions where restrictions have loosened? I mean, can you then, do you see governments putting those restrictions back in place, or do you think like once it's been allowed, how can they take it away?
It's kind of once it's allowed, that's just sort of the way that we've seen like the blue laws progress and Sunday laws and this sort of things, once you start to loosen things up, they continue to go in that direction. Once retailers get used to it, once the customers get used to it, it's just kind of hard to put the genie back in the bottle.
Right. So you're also my expert on tariffs. You were such a leader on that. You actually testified before Congress on behalf of small American retailers. And so explain the tariffs are still with us, but explain the impact that is just now trickling down to the consumer. It's been absorbed by various tiers, but importers, distributors, and retailers. And now consumers are starting to see price impact. And then also, if you could just talk about the silver lining of this experience.
Yeah. Well, when I was thinking about this question, I thought I was going to be able to give this quick history synopsis of the large civil aircraft and DST tariff situation, but I timed myself and I'm like, there's no such thing as a quick synopsis about this. So just trust me when I say that one action has to do with illegal airplane subsidies made to Boeing and Airbus, and one action has to do with international accounting code harmonization. So that we don't need to talk about. The important thing is neither of them really have to do with wine, but as part of this trade legislation process that's called the carousel, it's not legislative, it's a negotiation process, 25% tariffs have been levied on wine from several European countries, as well as certain spirits and various food products. And this was all meant to sort of hurt producers, apply pressure to producers of those products back in their home countries, but it doesn't work that way. And that's because of this weird wine ecosystem that exists within the US, which is the 3-tier system. Anybody who's not in the industry, just a quick little brief history on this is wineries, for the most part, cannot sell directly to retailers and restaurants. They have to pass through a legally mandated distributor tier. International wineries have to, for the most part, pass through an importer. Now, these companies they're American-owned companies. They're small to medium-sized companies for the most part. They're family-owned. These are the same companies that are selling European wine are also selling American wines. This wine ecosystem really includes the delivery trucks, the accountants, the marketing firms, the consumers, everybody sort of all the way from soup to nuts. Only one part of that whole chain is in Europe. So what this really means in terms of like cold hard cash is that for every dollar's worth of wine not imported because of these tariffs, consumers are spending about $4.50 less at American-owned companies throughout this ecosystem. It also means that we're starting to see these tariffs, these higher prices trickle through the system, and we're starting to see sort of less choice as the wines become more expensive. They're maybe shifted to other markets where the tariffs aren't involved. And then longer term, distributors and importers actually start to go out of business. So it's been about a year and a quarter that these tariffs have been in place, and the distributors and the importers can only sort of eat it for so long. So now we're really starting to see on the shelf prices of core categories starting to go up. So what looks like this effective strategy on paper, tax the fancy wineries, it doesn't really work in real life. And American businesses are definitely hurting at a higher rate than the wineries back in Europe. So it sucks. But I guess the silver lining is the fact that I'm here and able to tell you these stories with these numbers in place. This is it's what I would call sort of a Goldilocks issue. It's one of these rare issues where everybody within this wine ecosystem, all through the tiers, agrees that tariffs are a bad idea. Even American wineries agree that tariffs on European wines are a bad idea. So what we've kind of seen is suddenly everybody within the industry kind of becoming involved in understanding how to navigate the political process at the national level, which will then trickle down to being able to navigate it at the state level. That sort of idea of we're all in it together, we're all working together, seeing this grassroots lobbying organization that was formed pretty much overnight called the U.S. Wine Trade Alliance. We were about a year ago when you could do such things, sort of sommeliers and retailers and importers and distributors roaming the halls of Congress, letter writing campaigns, direct engagement with elected representatives. It's really been, we still have the tariffs. It's going to clear up. I'm an optimist. It will happen, but we've really learned how to navigate this. And once that's cleared up, who knows what we'll decide to focus on next.
Yeah, no, it's just really this unprecedented coming together and finding our voice as a collection of small businesses. Lastly, I wanted to ask you briefly about just this changing idea of what customer service means in this new landscape. So, retailers, not all retailers, but a lot of retailers, sales are wildly up. So no one's feeling sorry for retailers right now. But that said, shop owners have their own set of challenges. I mean, you've been talking about this a lot. You've had bad Yelp reviews because you only let 2 people in your shop. And as your priority became your staff safety and following laws, it's kind of forced you to reevaluate customer service and guest expectations. This is what, restaurants are dealing with this. We're going to talk to Gabby about that next. Talk about that experience. And if you think this could be like this industry reset on how we accommodate guests.
Yeah, I hope so. I think as part of this pandemic, shops and restaurants, everybody sort of in the industry has realized that we sort of have to put boundaries around what we're offering. We're reducing hours, we're limiting the number of people that we can have in the shops, we're setting really clear policies about delivery times, curbside pickup windows, that sort of thing. And it's been done out of necessity, obviously, to keep our staff safe and to keep our customers safe. But I think a lot of shop owners and restaurant owners are kind of discovering that these boundaries really aren't such a bad thing. As a shop owner, it's great to be an essential service, but no one's going to die if they don't get their wine within an hour of ordering it. They're not going to die if the bottle that they wanted isn't on the shelf because the distributor had to drop down their delivery schedule to 3 days a week. I've got other things to sell you. And if you have to wait in line to get into the shop during a busy time, you can wait in line. These things happen during normal times. And I've always been sort of a believer in the idea that the customer needs to be respected, but they're not always right. That you get to set the terms, you get to set the boundaries of what your business can do, and then you offer great service within that context. And I think I hope the pandemic is starting to make that idea a little bit more widely accepted. The tariffs highlighted that we're this broader industry ecosystem working together. I think the pandemic really illustrates that within each restaurant or within each wine shop, we're also an ecosystem, and it's not just the customer. The web includes the suppliers, the delivery guys, the guys that are delivering the wine out, that are bringing it in, the store staff. Everybody's working together along with the customer. So conversations I'm having with other retail shop owners, there's this idea of starting to ask, how do I manage my ecosystem so that it's profitable and sustainable and safe? And that means sort of looking at this balance between the customer needs and the needs of everybody else in the ecosystem. And I think every shop's going to need to find a different balance, but I think it's a good thing that everybody's more prepared to ask and answer that question. I hope it sticks around after the pandemic.
That would be a very good outcome. Yeah. Thank you for that. So moving on to Gabby. So Clay has been this like neighborhood mecca. I can speak because I live right down the street, and you guys were, you had candles in the window last spring when things were especially tough. And you have, there's been this outpouring of support. You talk about how you feel like your worth in your community. But there's also been, you're seeing a lot of really outrageous, entitled, racist, sometimes guest behavior. And I've heard this actually from a number of different restaurant operators, which it's counterintuitive to me, and it's so disappointing. But what do you think is behind this phenomena, and what are you observing?
Well, thank you for having me here, sharing this story and this experience that has been, quite challenging during all these months that we have been reopened after we were shut down. I don't know. I think, we have seen both. We have seen an amazing support from a lot of customers that have been there for us and, asking, what do you need from us? From like, do you need to buy plants? Because, where we were selling outside, every week was like a different thing that they needed. We need to have plants, for example. And we have customers, you need plants, here, this is a check so you guys can buy plants, and that, take that out of your, minds. Or, customers are like, you can work with that mask. You need to have a proper, doctors especially, that they have wearing masks and we have seen that, but also we saw that it was like very shocking because as, Krista was saying, it's like, no one is going to die if you don't get a table. No one is going to die if you can have, you can cook at home. We're not essential workers, really, I don't think. So it has been outrageous seeing people, not being quite respectful in all the, it has been a process, as, following what Kristen was saying, of like putting boundaries and rules and like, how can we do this, efficiently and, to keep everyone safe, like, especially our staff, because, when you go out to have dinner, you are there for like an hour and a half. But when you work outside, you are in contact with people for 8 hours or more. So, we need to keep us safe. And seeing people being like, well, I'm not going to comply to your rules. I don't care about your rules. I don't care about, I'm not wearing a mask, we're outside. Or, I'm not going to wait to sit until we're all here because I want to sit now. Or I'm going to overstay, I'm going to stay here for 3 hours and a half, even though you only have 8 tables. And, having people to understand that no, that can be the case anymore if you want us to be open. If you want to have restaurants open, you need to comply to what the restaurant thinks is best, right? And that has been a challenge. And a lot of people, it's less and less. I think those people, they never came back. And I think it's great because, I think one thing that we learn from, or I have, and my staff and the people that, in my team have learned is that we're human beings. We're worth to be, safe and alive as, as everyone else. And, having people to understand that now this is going to work as you are coming to my house and these are my rules. And I want you to have a great time in my house. I'm gonna, it's my house and I want you in. However, you're not going to tell me, to how things are done in my house. I think that has been the switch of mentality on our end. It's like, you are going to have a great time. However, you need to agree to this. Otherwise, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, no, I think it's such an important
And we have had
shift.
asked people to leave the restaurant. It's like, oh, you're not going to put a mask? Well, you're not going to eat here. That's it. I mean, it's as simple as that.
You've also described just receiving different treatment from your business partner,
yes,
who is white, Caucasian, and this kind of, racism, really. You're in a progressive neighborhood. You're in Harlem. It's shocking to me. I don't know if it's like the mask wearing, which people feel anonymous, or what's causing that.
That is one thing. That is one thing. And the other thing is like the tone that the previous administration said, that it's okay to be a racist. It's okay, you can be, and I think, these people are like that. And, the fact that you are, you are a woman, then you are Latina, and you're going to tell me what to do? No, it's not happening. And, it was really, it took us like a month to realize it, that if, Andrea would say the same thing that I was saying, people would be like, oh, okay, great, we will wait here. But if I would say the same thing, I would have like more, people would be like, no, why? So at one point I I stopped hostessing, and she took that role over because I was like, I'm not doing this.
Yeah, I think that could be one potential silver lining of this whole thing is if a lot of operators, have this moment to reflect that, no, this is not okay. The customer's not always right. And we have to sort of end this culture of yes that dominates the restaurant industry. And
especially, because in this particular situation, you are putting your life at risk, to serve people. It's as serious as that. So if we're going to do it, we're going to do it in our terms,
right?
To keep us safe and healthy.
Right. So switching gears entirely, natural wine. I love your list. You have such a beautifully curated list of, sustainable-minded producers that are kind of, low intervention winemaking. But, when you described your list, one of the key descriptors you use is clean. And so, now that natural wine has really made its way into the mainstream, and, we have casual wine drinkers coming into restaurants asking for natural wines, and they're so closely associating natural wine with that kind of funky, stinky, flawed taste profile. That's become natural wine for a lot of people. So it's up to you to kind of re-educate them. No, natural wine can also be clean and flaw-free. Do you think well, first of all, how do you do that? And then do you feel like this is a problem for natural wine as it sort of moves into the main? What does it mean for the future of that category?
Yes, I always tell people that I really like to have. I don't like to have wines that I have to explain tableside. Like, yeah, you really need to like this because it doesn't have any sulfites. It's. I think wine needs to be enjoyed without that. I mean, if you don't enjoy it and it has like all these faults and and it smells terrible and it tastes terrible, it's like, what? Why? And it's funny because a lot of people, they do come and they are like, oh, can I have like this that is like super funky and stinky? And I'm like, well, we don't have that exactly. And I explain it's like you are going to have, the same benefit is going to be an expression of terroir, and these winemakers, they take care and the whole thing, and explain them, and they seem surprised often by it.
Disappointed. It doesn't taste like a dirty sock.
Not really. Exactly. Not really, because I think that I don't think that it's disappointment. I think that, they are like surprised that it doesn't need to be like that, because a lot of people are really conscious about what they're drinking now. Who is the producer, what are the practices, and, and seeing that, it doesn't have to mean like to be a full wine. I think, I think they're happy about it, kind of like secretly.
And now I can be cool and actually like what I'm drinking.
Exactly.
Right. Thank you for
that.
So moving on to Samara. So Samara, when you were first getting into Whiskey as an Enthusiast, you were an event planner in Atlanta, and you noticed that none of the spirits companies were speaking to you. The messaging was entirely aimed at middle-aged white men, and that you were sort of put in this urban demographic mold where you were pitched, entry-level spirits. So when you launched Black Bourbon Society as an educational platform and, started creating this community, you also started partnering with a lot of the major whiskey suppliers. And, introducing them to the fact that, yeah, there's this huge group of young Black professionals who are real connoisseurs of wine and spirits. So are you starting to see the attitude change amongst a lot of these large suppliers that you work with as they realize like the cost of ignoring this, high spending, growing group?
Oh, absolutely. First, I do want to say thank you for having me be a part of this panel. It's an honor to sit, with so many amazing women who are so accomplished in each one of our own buckets of this industry. So thank you for having me here. But yes, absolutely. When I started Black Bourbon Society, I realized that there was a disconnect between the brands and connecting with consumers of color. And so, the main charge of Black Bourbon Society is twofold. We do work with consumers a lot on the educational piece, making sure that they are conscious consumers, that they're aware of sustainability, kind of like Gabriela, what she was saying, as far as making sure like they understand the significance of the spirits that they're drinking. But then also, again, working with the brands to make sure they understand the value of our audience that we were building. And, just off the bat, there was a research study done not too long ago that said that African Americans spend about $1.2 billion a year on wine, spirits, and tobacco. And that in itself, without any other evidence, without any other breakdown, is enough to catch anybody's eye that this is a demographic that spends a lot of money. And in fact, African Americans in all industries, we over-index, we overbuy, we overspend. And it's definitely something that the industry needed to to be aware of. I think, you know, most industries have taken advantage of this. They take our dollars not realizing where it comes from or not acknowledging the support from the community. And so it was really drawing that connection to say like, hey, you know, this is how much we spend on your product without even having some sort of recognition or without being marketed to. Imagine what type of growth you could have if you actually invested in your consumer, in this audience. So right off the bat, we received, you know, nothing but green lights, right? The industry was always welcome and open to working with us. But then also, they were also willing to learn how to connect with consumers of color that wasn't stereotypical or that wasn't pandering, which, you know, during that time, and even still, depending on the brand and again, depending on the industry, a lot of corporations will do marketing towards African Americans, but it's not in a genuine manner. So again, it was coming in and showing how do you build genuine engagement, genuine connections with this high discretionary consumers, you know, consumers of color.
And now you've taken it one step further, and last year you launched Diversity Distilled, and this is to help companies learn how to attract and retain and groom, you know, diverse talent within their own ranks. And the way, like same thing, like you present it sort of like Dia did earlier. This isn't like a feel-good thing. This is, if you want to grow, if you want to have a future, if you want to grow as a company, as a brand, like this is kind of essential. Have you talk about some of your work with those companies now that you're on the kind of the talent retention grooming side? Are you seeing progress? Are you seeing real change?
Absolutely. You know, last year, 2020 was a reckoning of all sorts. And so we've kind of seen how that plays in the restaurant scene. We've seen how it plays with the retail scene, especially with retail wine and spirits. But also it was a social awakening and a racial reckoning as well. And so, you know, right after George Floyd's murder and all of these, you know, and Breonna Taylor's murder and all these Black tiles started to come up, brands really started to, you know, show that they were in solidarity. And if not, we called them out and said, why weren't you? But then it really did make the companies go back and say, okay, how can we be more inclusive? How can we be more of the solution within our own organizations to really support diversity and inclusion, to really support, you know, more equality and equity within our business? Like, how can we do our part? And so a lot of the brands are now like really taking this deep dive, this really truth telling look at themselves to seeing like, whoa, there is no diversity at the top. There is no diversity, but maybe on the lower level. So they recognize that they do need to do better. So you saw such positions, you saw brands all of a sudden hiring positions for diversity and inclusion, you know, officers. So like Jim Beam, for instance, they now have a brand new position for a D&I position at the executive level so that they can actually like take the time to look to see where they could be more diverse and inclusive within their organization. LVMH as well, they also have a new D&I, head of D&I position that is over North America. Both of those positions were filled by African-American women. So even in that sense, it's like the brands knew that they've had a D&I issue. But due to this year, due to this awakening that we have all had in some way, experienced in some way, now they are really starting to put their money where their mouth is and invest in those positions and really trusting the people that they put in those positions to make some changes within their organizations.
That's great to hear. And it's not a quick fix. It's like you have to put the investment in for the long haul and, you know, spend years grooming the right talent. So I wanted to ask you about an interesting pandemic trend that you noticed amongst the Black Bourbon Society membership. You just saw people kind of hunkering down and this incredible spirit of adventure and experimenting with cocktail making and researching products online and making their own shrubs from scratch. Do you think this is something that's going to continue post the pandemic? And is this going to change the way people are drinking and purchasing?
Absolutely. Definitely. Once a lockdown hit, you know, everyone bought toilet paper and liquor. So it's like everyone made sure that they were stocked up because in the beginning in March, we had no idea how long we were going to be in this. And so, you know, as the pandemic grew, our membership with Black Bourbon Society tripled. But because folks started to say like, okay, let me find a new hobby. Or I always wanted to learn more about bourbon and spirits. And now this is my opportunity to do so, since I can't go to my local bar and just, you know, drink whatever I order there. So definitely the educational piece for us has been huge this year, just making sure folks understand what they're drinking. And then also the opportunity for them to just dive down the rabbit hole of cocktail making. So yeah, we've got homemade shrub bitters. I've got a member who is incorporating crazy ingredients in cocktails like baby food and duck fat washes. It's become this whole like or trend within Black Bourbon Society. But it really does show that like when you inform your consumer, when you equip them with the knowledge, like they fall in love even more. You know, it's not just nerdy to know this information, but it's actually building and planting seeds and building roots with the consumer. The more education, the more you give them, the more they'll latch on to it. And so that's what's been seen. Now, as we move into the future, absolutely. I feel like our members are going to continue down this rabbit hole, continue to sharpen up their skills. But I know we can't wait to get back outside. You know, we can't wait to get out and support our local bartenders and bars and restaurants to try new wines, because again, you still have some folk who will buy every single product. And when it comes to super expensive or allocated bourbon, they don't want to buy that bottle if they don't know if they like it. So they do want to have the opportunity to still go to bars and restaurants to be able to try it there. And if they love it there, then they'll go home and buy it and add it to their collections.
Great, thank you. And I loved how you described it, like this vision of the bar carts and like the return, it's like Mad Men, except more diverse, like this vision
Absolutely.
of this cocktail culture. But thank you, Samara. So finally, we have Anna Christina, and then we're gonna have I see a lot of questions coming in on the chat. So Anna Christina, you've been this real voice for, again, bringing up tough topics, having difficult discussions about the ways in which the pandemic exposed a lot of problems in the industry that were already there. You know, the restaurant industry is experiencing a mental health crisis. That's one of the reasons you created Sommation last year, to create community and conversations about wellness. I mean, but bottom line, you sort of believe the industry is broken on some level, like the way we value labor, with all restaurants models being sort of built on this minimum wage, you know, salary. There's just this no concept of like investing in people, and there's so many groups that are exploited. So in all the discussions that you've been having over the last 9 months, what are some of the solutions that you're hearing or talking about with your community about how can we reimagine this? What's a healthier model look like?
Sure. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you so much. And ladies, thank you for having me on this panel. It's really such an honor, and what a super flattered powerhouse team here. But thank you for having me. And let me kind of frame my answer a little bit. So number one, I can't believe it was nearly a year ago. And secondly, I started going live just on Instagram on a whim because it was a recommendation of a friend. Whether or not it was truly my own therapy to deal with the pandemic is another question, but you know, I was going live 6 days a week, just interviewing different individuals up and down the hospitality chain, not just front of house, just to see how everyone was dealing with the pandemic. And it was great because somehow after each conversation, I'd continue that conversation and everyone said, wow, that felt great. I'm like, this is the one thing everyone said. Maybe this is a cathartic experience. Everyone wants to let go and like say something, right? And so by the time it was like April moving into May, I said, I'm kind of done asking the question of how you're dealing with the pandemic. I started seeing mental health kind of being that next topic that we needed to tackle. But then on top of that, I knew that I needed to kind of grow the team because I can only yell so loud from my corner. So we created this team called Summation, and there's 10 of us, all sommeliers, wine professionals, and we go live 4 days out of the week. And every single day, we do talk a little bit about wine, and sometimes we'll interview different people. But every day there's a certain theme, and it's to really motivate the talent that this industry is so rich and full of. And we can only hope that some way, somehow, like they find their way with this energy to kind of spark something within themselves to kind of turn the situation around. Now, I know that was kind of like the long-winded story here, but I just wanted to give an idea of like what we're all about. Now, as for like having to, I'm sorry, the tail end of the question was more so, can you repeat that?
Yeah, just how, you know, this kind of broken model, the restaurant industry, you know, on the backs of minimum wage employees, you know, how can we, how do we rebuild with a healthier model? What does that look like as you're kind of brainstorming potential scenarios?
My mind spins in so many different directions. I think sometimes my brain talks faster than my mouth, but I think in general, it's going to be a hard answer just because it has to be a collective buy-in. It just can't be individual restaurants out on their own. It has to be the mentality of we want to be a sustainable business up and down, and not just in food and wine, but also with our labor, with also those who we are renting our restaurants from or our businesses from, right? And so, you know, for anyone to kind of do this on their own right now, they look contrarian, they look crazy. But in the long run, look what it's brought us to now. Like to be able to, you know, survive on a very limited staff where they're putting their lives on the line. I mean, that's really challenging here. And yet the demands and expectations only increase, right? But let me also put it in this perspective. Why can't it change? Because when we go, let's just remove restaurants from the equation here. When we go to a luxury boutique or a boutique in general, when we walk in there, there's almost this expectation that I will pay. And these businesses already have it figured out or calculated into their costs that my labor is X. Why is it that we can't design something like this where we do bring up, you know, some costs or prices, because dining out is a luxury. And I think we've taken that for granted, 100%. When I go out, I don't really, apart from the wine list, I will admit, I do have to look at the wine list from time to time, but on the menu, I don't really look at the prices because I know I didn't cook it. It's a luxury to dine out. Everyone should know how to cook, right? And so when it's time for me to pay, I'm thrilled to do it because someone took care of me. Someone took the time to assemble this beautiful dinner, this experience for me to dine in. Why is it that we can't change the model a little bit, that we can fix in the cost or at least our labor, the people who take care of us on a day-to-day basis? And, you know, when, you know, I have to say, I'm so glad, Christy, that you brought up the topic of kind of reconfiguring the mind of the guests, because this is something that we are going to talk about as well, where why is it that we can't take care of our labor or our staff, our family at the end of the day? Because we spend 10 to 15 hours a day with these people, sometimes more than with our family, right? And why can't we take care of them first in such a way that's more sustainable, which is great in the long run because you want to keep those same people, especially if they're performing at a certain level, that brings everyone back in. I think what we forget from time to time, especially with restaurants, it's about community. And that's what makes a restaurant survive.
Yeah, you mentioned something really interesting to me when we were speaking that, you know, so this, you know, a version of this, yes, prices are going to go up. People are going to have to pay more. You know, there's other models, like I've heard people talk about like equity sharing amongst your staff, you know, restaurants kind of building models like that. But at the end of the day, in a really restaurant heavy city like New York, yeah, there's not going to be as many restaurants. And maybe that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
Like taking out that kind, elevating other cuisines. And
I am from the camp where maybe we should have less restaurants, because for me, I don't think everyone belongs in hospitality. I think, restaurants is a very specialized skill. Whereas in New York or in other markets, you'll have someone who is just taking a gig because they just need something else to make the ends meet. And then it kind of dilutes what service is, right? And then we get into, that kind of just leads into like little pricing wars, if you will, this competition in which, well, I just have to keep driving down prices so then I can just maintain a certain level of service. But why is it that we can't like take care of the really good people, keep them there, especially now when you want to like bring down your staffing level to a certain extent? You need that specialized skill. We need to make sure that like we're taking care of our people. And then on top of that, it's great because then it also leads to opportunities for, I hate to use the word ethnic, but I am going to bring it up. Why is it that everyone expects ethnic food to be cheap? That's not cool. They work just as hard and giving up so much of their lives to take care of people and show them what their rich culture is all about. So if we have the opportunity to also kind of like elevate, their voices and their culture and their history, then I think we'll see some really awesome art. Like that's what really it is. Like art and hospitality really shine in this business. It's just a matter of coming together as a collective saying, this is not okay. You have, I had a staff where some of them had to work 2 or 3 jobs and I tried to give them so many shifts and I tried to take care of them. But at the end of the day, like there were just certain demands of me. And if I could redo it all over again, I would try to create a model that would just try to keep a core group and make sure to take care of them on a daily basis.
Great insights. So we are running out of time. I want to go through and I'm going to just kind of a lightning round. I'm going to ask each panelist one consumer trend they're seeing that they think will be part of the permanent landscape post-pandemic. And then we're going to answer some of the questions that are coming in on the chat. Who wants to go first? Anyone?
Apparently, baby food,
Yeah.
I'm hearing.
Baby food and drinks.
I focus heavily on an agave spirit space. So as we've seen like tequila take off and mezcal take off over at Lobos, it's interesting to see how much more can be done with agave and things that are coming out like raicilla and different things that can be done with blue ever agave. So I think that's something to watch what the future of agave spirits is.
Great, thanks.
I think it seems sort of obvious right now, given that we're all staring at our screens, but virtual tastings. I think they've kind of moved from something that we did because we have to certain situations where done right, they actually sort of add something to the experience, or they add a different experience that has some value.
I have to piggyback on top of that as far as just virtual tastings and virtual events. Before pre-pandemic, we were producing events with the brands in major cities, right? In cities that the brands really wanted to have traction. And so that's like Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, Chicago, DC, Atlanta, like just those top 10 cities, right? Or top 6, but there's a couple few more. Now in the virtual space, we're able to touch everyone no matter what city they live in. So like, we have a huge contingency that lives in Omaha, Nebraska. And I will never get a brand to pay for me to produce an event in Omaha. But by doing virtual programming, by doing national programming, the brands are actually getting further reach and they're getting more bang for their dollars because they're able to touch everybody no matter where they live.
Anna Christina, you want to go next?
Sure. I don't know if this is necessarily a trend or more so a fallout from the pandemic, but what I love seeing now is that the entity is now having to look to partner and have to spin off and find alternative means to kind of bring in the income, right? So even restaurants are creating more virtual events and partnering with others, or creating like auxiliary products like extra pastas or, you know, meal kits or something like that. They're stretching their creativity in a way that, you know, they haven't done before. They were just limiting themselves to where their boxes, and now they're stretching themselves, and call it a trend or more so a fallout. I think it's fantastic.
That's great. I've seen a lot of that too. Like it's a way to extend your brand they never explored before, but now they have. Gabby, anything you're seeing?
I think probably as a result of the pandemic, we're gonna see like smaller wine lists in restaurants. They're gonna be smaller, and you know, as the tariff that Christy was talking as well, I think they're gonna be smaller, but they're gonna be more focused. And leaner probably. That is one thing that I think what we'll be seeing. And the other one is I have seen a lot of interest in female winemakers, a lot of interest recently. Those two, I think.
That's okay. You can have two. That was great. So I just have a couple of questions coming in I want to throw out there. So this is for Samara or Dia. When brands are excluding people of color from their messaging, what are the issues or the typical issues with their messaging that is causing that exclusion?
It's messages that infantilize any population or lean on tropes instead of actually taking the time and doing the research to understand any population is not a monolith. So I think Samara hit on this. One thing that was, I think, doesn't sound particularly revolutionary, but for Ciroc with the vodka at that time, you could pull out 100 vodka ads and they were all the same shade of cool blue with, you know, one solitary white male who would, you know, had made his journey all by himself, and it was just very opposite of honestly most people's experience of all genders and colors, right? So we were very intentional about balancing glamour with joy and group. And this is early, you know, kind of everybody is much more focused on communion. But at that time, you know, still had a little bit of the 80s, 90s Wolf of Wall Street mentality permeating the United States. And it was a different thing to say like, yeah, we can have a great time and we can choose great products, but you choose great products to honor the people you celebrate with and bring that forward. And that's skin color agnostic. And let's actually showcase that for a population that was largely ignored.
Just to add to that, from my perspective, a lot of the brands have one way of messaging their spirits, and then they often have the larger brands especially have a department called multicultural that then focuses on African-American, Latino, Asian, LGBTQI, and also women. Like everybody kind of falls into the second tier versus like general messaging again, which is, you know, their stable consumer, which is, you know, middle-aged white men. And so just that approach from a corporate perspective, this us versus them, that in itself, it creates this division that shouldn't happen. Like your general messaging can be translated for everyone. It's stick to the product, stick to the quality of the product, because all of those buckets, no matter who you are, really just like a quality product. And they want, again, that they want the educational piece. Now, there are some things that you can add on top of that, right? But instead of separating it out and saying, okay, this is how we're going to talk to Black people, this is how we're going to talk to Latinos, this is how we're going to talk to Asians, build on that. This is the overall messaging. And then this is how we are going to build deeper connections with like what Dia said, with community, like building into that community, really highlighting what's amazing about those community groups on top of that general messaging, not coming up with like some specific only messaging for the Blacks, the Asians, and the Latinos, like
or the pink bottles for women. Yeah,
right,
yeah.
right. Like, you know what I mean? Like you don't have to be so like trope, right? You don't have to fall into these tropes. Just, you know, respect everyone, have a great product to promote, and then enhance with what makes that special for each with each demographic.
So smart. I remember those days when that's what they used to call it, the multicultural division. I'm sure they had it at LVMH, Christy, when you worked there. And it's that segmentation. It's, I'm glad we're getting away from that. I guess that's your work now, Samara, with these big companies. So we have a question about mental health. And this is for everybody. So when considering the mental health of your staff or your direct reports, what techniques work the best? Like, how do you maintain, I guess, high mental health amongst your people who work for you?
I'm happy to, I mean, I just had this today, actually. I think coming from, I'll take a step back too. When I worked at Combs Enterprises, if you guys are familiar with Puff Daddy or Brother Love or Diddy, whatever you may know him as, he's a genius and I learned so much working for him. But it's a very 24-hour intense, like he's not successful in accident. It's an environment where this would be put to the test quite a bit, if you could imagine. And I think it's just really important to actually care about the total person. Like, I know that it's work, but I literally earlier today had somebody who was just like, I'm going through a lot. And it doesn't, you know, it's a little bit like, just, how can I actually help for real in real life? Like, whatever you need. I know doctors and lawyers, or you just want to talk about it or whatever you need. And if not, please take the time. You can leave right now. Like, there's nothing you're doing. To everyone's point, like, I'm very happy to be selling tequila, but it is not going to make or break the world if you're not here for the rest of the day. Take your time. There's nothing more valuable than you. And this whole organization will be broken if we're all filled up with people who don't have the time to be their whole entire selves. And just to not to again go back to like a capitalism point of view, it's bad for business to have half of your staff upset, distressed, and disrespected. You actually have to invest in their humanity for the best of the business.
So obvious.
You would think.
That's great. No, we need more of that. So this is a question for anybody. So the restaurant question. What advice do you have for young people entering the restaurant industry with ambitions to own their own restaurant? Gosh, it's hard right now. Hard question right now. However, I remember an earlier panel earlier this spring where we were talking about, one potential upside is, if real estate gets more expensive, maybe the restaurant industry especially in cities like New York, it's, maybe there will be opportunities for young chefs to have their own restaurants if real estate prices kind of become more sane.
I think it's possible, for sure. I mean, I'm in the Upper East Side, and I walk around my neighborhood not even recognizing it anymore. The Upper East Side is really well known for, mom and pop places, and it's just really sad for me to go up and down here not seeing like the same storefronts that I'm used to. And I think this is a really neat opportunity or timing for restaurants where we can get creative. I think, even though I heard this stat where some landlords are kind of holding back a little bit because they think that it's going to bounce back soon, I think we're still a long shot, especially for a major city like New York City. But I think this is a real opportunity for leaders, and especially for those who are really creative, to like work with their landlords to figure out more, maybe something along the lines of like profit sharing, but not your traditional model per se, where it's just a flat rate per month.
That's interesting. So bringing the landlord in on the to have equity in the space, because landlords love restaurants in their spaces.
It's questionable, especially in New York City, but in general, it does bring a nice community and warmth to the neighborhood. So I hope to see that more happen here more.
And I think just to build on that, I've got the wine shop up in the Hudson Valley. I'm in the Hudson Valley right now. We're seeing a lot of people moving up here, and maybe not opening the restaurant whole hog up here, but doing a pop-up or doing some sort of thing like that to just, it's so much less expensive than it is in the city, and you can get sort of an opportunity to sort of test something out and see if you like it and if it's something you actually want to do before you sign your own lease.
Good advice. And actually, Christy, we have one question for you specifically about retail. So considering this new infrastructure for retailers, would delivery work for smaller retailers? Is it necessary to use Drizzly? And does it make sense to develop your own delivery system? This is a great question to ask you, because you wrote about this very topic in an article for SevenFifty Daily, which is publishing tomorrow.
It's a great story that you can read all about it tomorrow. I think the thing with delivery is it will vary It varies definitely market by market and store by store. You can certainly do it on your own. I've in God, I don't even know how many years, 15 years of various wine retail things. I think I've partnered with a delivery service maybe once or twice. It's really, really important to understand not just the incremental sales that you're generating from delivery, but what's the profit that you're getting from each of those deliveries. And you want to know what that number is. And just kind of, this goes back to that conversation about setting boundaries and figuring out what works for your business. If you can't do 1 hour delivery, don't do 1 hour delivery. If you need a 3 p.m. cutoff time to get it delivered by that evening, do it. But you need to really understand what works for you, what will be profitable, and what will be sustainable. And that's just, running the numbers.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. This was such an honor to moderate this. I'm going to hand it back over to Jen to close us out.
Oh, thank you, Kristen. Again, thank you to everybody. I mean, this panel gave us so much food for thought. And I think we're going to keep this conversation going. And our organization, Les Dames, wants to be a support in any way that we can. So really, thank you everybody for all of your questions, and just wanted to let everybody know that we have a few upcoming Les Dames events that you can check out on our website, www.ldny.org, including a Franciacorta tasting on Valentine's Day, which should be a lot of fun. So I've included it in the chat, and that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Have a good
Cheers, ladies.
Bye.